The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Liberty as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her tactical vest for the third time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. Today would change everything. She had spent months preparing for this moment, and now General William Hayes was coming to inspect their unit. Maria stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, with olive skin that spoke of her Mexican heritage and eyes that held secrets deeper than most soldiers twice her age. At 28, she was younger than many expected for someone carrying the M40 sniper rifle that now rested against her shoulder. The weapon felt natural in her grip, like an extension of her own body. "Santos, you sure about this?" whispered Corporal Jake Martinez, her spotter and closest friend in the unit. His worried expression matched the concern in his voice. The general doesn't exactly have a reputation for being open-minded about women in combat roles. Maria's jaw tightened. She had heard the stories about General Hayes. A decorated veteran of 3 wars, he belonged to the old school of military thinking. Women belonged in support roles, not on the front lines with precision rifles. But Maria Santos was not just any woman, and today he would learn that the hard way. "I didn't come this far to back down now, Jake," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her chest. "Besides, someone authorized me to carry this rifle. If the general has a problem with it, he can take it up with whoever signed those orders." The truth was more complicated than Maria let on. Her authorization came from sources that even General Hayes would find difficult to question. But that story would have to wait. Right now, she needed to focus on the inspection that could make or break her military career. Colonel Robert Chen, their unit commander, approached with quick, nervous steps. His usually calm demeanor showed cracks of anxiety as he adjusted his uniform. Chen was a good officer, but he walked a tightrope between supporting his soldiers and keeping his superiors happy. Having a female sniper in his unit put him in a difficult position, especially with General Hayes coming to evaluate their readiness. "Listen up, everyone," Colonel Chen called out, gathering the small group of soldiers around him. "General Hayes will be here in 20 minutes. I want everything perfect. No mistakes, no surprises, and absolutely no controversial discussions." His eyes lingered on Maria for a moment longer than necessary. She understood the unspoken message. Keep quiet, don't draw attention, and maybe they could all get through this inspection without incident. But Maria Santos had never been good at staying quiet, especially when it came to proving herself in a world that constantly questioned her right to be there. The other soldiers in their unit had mixed reactions to Maria's presence. Some, like Jake, had come to respect her abilities after seeing her performance in training exercises. Others remained skeptical, whispering among themselves about special treatment and lowered standards. Maria heard their comments but chose her battles carefully. Let her shooting speak louder than their doubts. Sergeant First Class Tommy Williams was the most vocal of her critics. A thick-built man from Texas with 15 years of military experience, he made no secret of his belief that women had no place in combat roles. He stood across the formation, shaking his head as he watched Maria check her equipment. "I still don't understand how she got clearance for that weapon," Williams muttered to the soldier next to him, not bothering to lower his voice. "There's got to be some political nonsense behind this. Diversity quotas or some garbage like that." Maria's fingers tightened on her rifle, but she kept her expression neutral. She had dealt with men like Williams her entire military career. Actions would convince him, not arguments. The sound of approaching vehicles broke the morning tension. 3 black SUVs rolled through the camp gates, kicking up dust clouds that shimmered in the desert heat. General Hayes had arrived, and with him came the moment of truth that Maria had been preparing for since the day she first picked up a rifle. As the vehicles came to a stop, soldiers throughout the camp snapped to attention. Maria felt her heartbeat quicken, but her breathing remained controlled. Years of training had taught her to manage stress, whether facing enemy fire or hostile questioning from superior officers. General William Hayes stepped out of the lead vehicle with the bearing of a man who had commanded respect his entire adult life. At 55, he carried himself with military precision, his gray hair perfectly trimmed and his uniform immaculate. 2 stars gleamed on his shoulders, and ribbons covered his chest in neat rows that told the story of a distinguished career. Behind him emerged Colonel Patricia Moore, his aide-de-camp, and Master Sergeant David Price, his security detail leader. The general's team moved with practiced efficiency, surveying the camp with professional eyes that missed nothing. Maria watched as General Hayes approached their formation. His gaze swept across the assembled soldiers, evaluating their stance, their equipment, and their readiness. When his eyes reached her, they stopped. For a long moment, the general stared at the M40 rifle in her hands, his expression unreadable. Colonel Chen stepped forward and saluted smartly. "General Hayes, welcome to Camp Liberty. The 3rd Reconnaissance Unit is ready for your inspection, sir." "Thank you, Colonel," General Hayes replied, returning the salute. His voice carried the authority of command, but Maria detected something else beneath the surface. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe confusion. The general began his walk down the line of soldiers, asking questions about their training, their equipment, and their mission readiness. Each soldier responded with crisp, professional answers. Maria waited her turn, knowing that her moment was approaching with each step the general took. When General Hayes finally stopped in front of her, the entire camp seemed to fall silent. Even the desert wind appeared to hold its breath as 2 very different military careers intersected in that moment. "Soldier," the general said, his voice carrying across the formation, "what's your name and position?" "Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, sir. Designated marksman for the 3rd Reconnaissance Unit." General Hayes looked at her rifle, then back at her face. "And who authorized you to carry that M40, Staff Sergeant?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Maria felt every eye in the camp focused on her, waiting for her response. This was the moment she had prepared for, the moment that would define not just her career, but possibly the careers of many women who would follow in her footsteps. Colonel Chen shifted nervously beside the general, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Sergeant Williams watched with barely concealed satisfaction, convinced that Maria was about to be exposed as an imposter in a man's job. But Maria Santos had not come this far to be intimidated by questions, no matter who was asking them. Her father had taught her to stand tall in the face of doubt. Her drill sergeants had taught her to respect the chain of command, and her own experiences had taught her that sometimes the only way to earn respect was to demand it. "Sir," she began, her voice clear and confident, "my authorization came through proper channels. I have all the required certifications, completed advanced marksmanship school, and qualified expert with this weapon system." "That's not what I asked, Staff Sergeant," General Hayes replied, his tone growing sharper. "I want to know specifically who authorized a woman to carry a precision rifle in a frontline combat unit." The challenge was unmistakable now. This wasn't just about military protocol or chain of command. This was about whether women belonged in combat roles, whether they could be trusted with the responsibility that came with being a sniper, and whether the military was ready to change with the times. Maria felt the weight of every woman who had fought for the right to serve in combat roles. She thought about her sister, currently deployed with a medical unit in Afghanistan, and her mother, who had served as a Navy corpsman during the Gulf War. 3 generations of military women, each fighting their own battles for acceptance and respect. "Sir, I believe you'll find that my authorization is in order," Maria replied, meeting the general's stern gaze without flinching. "And I'm prepared to demonstrate my qualifications if you have any doubts about my capabilities." A murmur rippled through the assembled soldiers. Jake Martinez looked worried. Colonel Chen appeared ready to step in, and Sergeant Williams smiled like a man who had just watched his favorite team score a touchdown. General Hayes studied Maria for a long moment, his expression giving nothing away. Years of command had taught him to read soldiers, to separate the competent from the incompetent, the confident from the cocky. What he saw in Staff Sergeant Santos intrigued him, even as it challenged his long-held beliefs about women in combat. "Is that so?" the general said finally. "Well, Staff Sergeant Santos, it seems we have ourselves a situation here. You claim to be qualified, but I have serious doubts about the wisdom of putting weapons like this in the hands of soldiers who may not have the physical or mental capacity to use them effectively in combat situations." The insult was subtle, but unmistakable. Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks. But her training kicked in. Never show emotion during a confrontation with a superior officer. Stay professional, stay focused, and let your actions do the talking. "I understand your concerns, sir," Maria replied, her voice remaining steady. "But I believe my record speaks for itself. I've completed every training requirement, passed every qualification test, and scored higher than 70% of my male counterparts in long-range accuracy assessments." Colonel Chen finally stepped forward, sensing that the situation was about to escalate beyond his ability to control it. "General, perhaps we could continue this discussion in private. Staff Sergeant Santos is one of our most dedicated soldiers, and I can vouch for her professionalism and skill." But General Hayes wasn't finished. He had spent 30 years in the military watching standards decline, political correctness override common sense, and social experiments put good soldiers at risk. As far as he was concerned, this was exactly the kind of situation that proved his point about the dangers of mixing politics with military effectiveness. "Colonel, I appreciate your loyalty to your soldiers," the general said, his voice carrying across the formation so that everyone could hear. "But loyalty doesn't stop bullets, and good intentions don't win battles. When lives are on the line, we need warriors, not social justice experiments." The words hit Maria like physical blows, but she refused to show it. She had heard similar comments before, from drill sergeants who wanted to break her spirit, from fellow soldiers who wanted her to quit, and from officers who saw her as a liability rather than an asset. But she had also heard other words of encouragement from her father, who had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old, words of pride from her mother, who had fought her own battles for acceptance in a male-dominated military, and words of respect from soldiers like Jake Martinez, who had seen her abilities firsthand and knew that gender had nothing to do with marksmanship skills. "Sir," Maria said, taking a step forward, "with all due respect, I'm not a social justice experiment. I'm a soldier. I've earned my place in this unit through the same training, the same testing, and the same standards as every other sniper in the military. If you have doubts about my abilities, I invite you to put them to the test." General Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Are you challenging me, Staff Sergeant?" "No, sir. I'm offering to demonstrate my qualifications. You questioned who authorized me to carry this rifle. I'm prepared to show you exactly why that person made the right decision." The camp fell completely silent. Even the distant sounds of military vehicles and equipment seemed to fade as everyone waited for the general's response. This was unprecedented territory, a direct challenge between a young female soldier and a decorated general who represented decades of military tradition. Colonel Chen looked like he wanted to disappear into the desert sand. Sergeant Williams watched with obvious anticipation, convinced that Maria was about to destroy her career with her defiant attitude. Jake Martinez stood ready to support his friend, even if it meant damaging his own military future. General Hayes studied Maria's face, looking for signs of fear, uncertainty, or the kind of false bravado that often masked incompetence. Instead, he saw something that reminded him of his younger self, back when he was a lieutenant fresh out of West Point, eager to prove himself worthy of the uniform he wore. "Very well, Staff Sergeant Santos," the general said finally. "You want to demonstrate your qualifications? Let's see what you can do. Master Sergeant Price, set up a shooting demonstration. I want to see if this soldier can back up her bold words with actual skill." As the camp erupted into activity preparing for the impromptu shooting demonstration, Maria Santos felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She had just committed herself to a test that would either validate her place in the military or potentially end her career. There was no middle ground now, no room for mistakes and no second chances. The next few minutes would determine not just her future, but possibly the future of every woman who dreamed of serving in combat roles. The pressure was enormous, but Maria Santos had never backed down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. As soldiers scurried to set up targets and prepare the shooting range, Maria checked her rifle one more time, said a silent prayer, and prepared to show General Hayes exactly who had authorized her to carry the M40 sniper rifle. The answer was more complicated than he could possibly imagine, and more impressive than he was prepared to believe. Master Sergeant David Price moved with mechanical precision as he organized the shooting demonstration. 23 years in the military had taught him to follow orders without question, even when those orders came from situations he didn't fully understand. He glanced at Staff Sergeant Santos as she prepared her equipment, noting the calm focus in her movements. "Range is 500 yards, Price announced to the assembled group. "Standard military targets, wind speed approximately 8 miles per hour from the southwest." General Hayes stood with his arms crossed, watching every detail of the preparation. His aide, Colonel Patricia Moore, took notes on her tablet, documenting what was clearly becoming an unusual inspection report. The other soldiers formed a loose semicircle around the shooting position, their faces showing mixtures of curiosity, concern, and anticipation. Maria Santos knelt beside her rifle case, methodically checking each piece of equipment. Her hands moved with practiced confidence as she examined the scope mounts, tested the bolt action, and verified her ammunition. This ritual had become second nature over the years, a meditation that helped calm her mind before critical shots. Jake Martinez positioned himself nearby, ready to spot targets and provide wind calculations. He had done this dozens of times with Maria during training exercises, and their partnership had developed into an effective team. But today felt different. Today, everything they had worked toward was being tested by someone who had already decided they didn't belong. "Staff Sergeant," General Hayes called out, "before we begin this demonstration, I want to make something clear. I'm not interested in parlor tricks or lucky shots. If you're going to convince me that you belong in a combat role with that weapon, you're going to have to show me real skill under pressure." Maria looked up from her equipment, meeting the general's challenging stare. "I understand, sir. What would you like me to demonstrate?" General Hayes walked closer to the shooting position, his boots creating small dust clouds with each step. 5 shots, 5 different targets in less than 2 minutes. And I want explanations for every decision you make. Wind calculations, breathing patterns, sight adjustments. If you're truly qualified for this position, you should be able to teach me something about precision shooting. The challenge was more complex than a simple accuracy test. General Hayes was asking Maria to perform while explaining her techniques, splitting her concentration between execution and education. It was the kind of multitasking that separated expert marksmen from merely competent ones. "Yes, sir," Maria replied, settling into her shooting position. "Jake, can you confirm wind direction and speed?" Corporal Martinez raised a small flag and observed the surrounding vegetation. "Wind is southwest at 8 miles per hour, gusting occasionally to 12. Temperature is 84 degrees, humidity low." Maria adjusted her scope accordingly, making calculations in her head while explaining her process to General Hayes. "At this distance and wind speed, I'm compensating approximately 2 inches left and 1 inch up from center mass. The temperature affects bullet velocity so I'm adjusting for a slightly flatter trajectory than standard conditions would require. She chambered her first round and settled into her natural breathing pattern. Breathing control is critical for consistent accuracy. I take a breath, release half of it, then hold while making the shot. This minimizes body movement and creates a stable platform for the rifle. General Hayes watched intently as Maria lined up her first target. Her explanation was technically sound, delivered with confidence but without arrogance. She clearly understood the science behind precision shooting, but understanding theory and executing under pressure were two different things. Target 1, center mass, Maria announced, then squeezed the trigger with steady pressure. The shot echoed across the desert, and all eyes turned to the spotting scope where Master Sergeant Price was evaluating the result. A moment of silence stretched until Price's voice confirmed what everyone hoped to hear. Center mass, dead on. Excellent shot. Maria quickly worked the bolt and chambered her second round, transitioning to a target positioned 50 yards further downrange. Target 2 requires additional elevation adjustment. The increased distance means more bullet drop, and the crosswind will have greater effect over the longer flight time. She made minute adjustments to her scope, her movements economical and precise. General Hayes found himself impressed despite his reservations. The young sergeant clearly knew her weapon system thoroughly, and her explanations demonstrated both technical knowledge and practical experience. Target 2. Center mass, Maria called out and fired her second shot. Another hit, center mass, Master Sergeant Price confirmed. By now, other personnel around the base had noticed the impromptu shooting demonstration. Soldiers from various units had gathered at a respectful distance, drawn by curiosity and the unusual sight of a general personally observing a shooting test. Word was spreading that something significant was happening at the range. Maria continued her demonstration, transitioning smoothly between targets while maintaining her running commentary. Her third shot struck a moving target that simulated an enemy soldier advancing across open ground. Her fourth shot hit a partially concealed target that represented a sniper's typical challenge of engaging enemies behind cover. One target remaining, General Hayes announced, checking his watch. You have 30 seconds left. The final target was the most challenging, positioned at maximum effective range and partially obscured by heat shimmer rising from the desert floor. Maria took a moment to study the conditions, making final calculations for the most difficult shot of the demonstration. This target requires compensation for mirage effects caused by thermal currents, she explained, her voice remaining calm despite the time pressure. The heat shimmer can create optical illusions that throw off bullet placement by several inches at this range. She settled into her shooting position one final time, controlling her breathing and blocking out all external distractions. The assembled crowd, General Hayes, her own career prospects, all faded into background noise as she focused entirely on the mechanics of making a perfect shot. The rifle fired, and everyone waited for Master Sergeant Price's assessment of the final target. The silence stretched longer than before, creating tension that made several soldiers shift nervously. Direct hit, center mass, Price finally announced. 5 for 5, all within the designated scoring zones. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the assembled soldiers. Even Sergeant Williams, who had been skeptical of Maria's abilities, nodded with grudging respect. The demonstration had been flawless, executed under pressure with technical precision that would have impressed any marksmanship instructor. General Hayes studied the target results through binoculars, verifying Master Sergeant Price's assessments. All 5 shots had indeed struck their intended targets with accuracy that met or exceeded military standards. But the general's expression remained unreadable as he lowered the binoculars and turned back to Maria. "Impressive shooting, Staff Sergeant Santos," he said finally. "You clearly know how to handle that rifle under controlled conditions. But combat is not a shooting range, and enemy soldiers don't stand still waiting to be shot. Maria sensed that the general was not yet convinced, despite her successful demonstration. She had proven her marksmanship skills, but evidently that was not enough to address his deeper concerns about women in combat roles. "Sir, you're absolutely right," Maria replied, standing and shouldering her rifle. "Combat conditions are unpredictable and demanding. That's why I've spent the last 3 years preparing for deployment, not just on shooting ranges, but in realistic training scenarios that simulate actual combat stress." Colonel Chen stepped forward, sensing an opportunity to provide additional context. "General, Staff Sergeant Santos has completed advanced combat training, survival school, and specialized sniper courses. Her performance ratings have been consistently excellent across all evaluation criteria." But General Hayes was not ready to concede the point. "Colonel, I've seen plenty of soldiers who performed well in training but failed when faced with real combat stress. The question isn't whether she can hit targets on a range, it's whether she can function effectively when people are shooting back." "Then perhaps," said a new voice from behind the assembled group, "you should ask someone who has actually seen her perform under those conditions." Everyone turned to see a figure approaching from the direction of the base headquarters. As the man drew closer, his identity became clear, and several soldiers immediately snapped to attention. Command Sergeant Major Robert Blake, the senior enlisted advisor to the base commander, was walking toward their group with purposeful strides. Blake was a legend in military circles, a career soldier with 4 combat deployments and a reputation for brutal honesty about soldier capabilities. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, with graying hair and scars that told stories of battles fought in distant countries. When he spoke about combat effectiveness, people listened. "Sergeant Major Blake," General Hayes said, returning the man's salute. "I wasn't aware you were observing our little demonstration." "Word travels fast on a military base, sir," Blake replied with a slight smile, "especially when it involves questions about soldier qualifications. I thought you might benefit from some additional perspective about Staff Sergeant Santos." General Hayes raised an eyebrow. "You know this soldier?" "I should, sir. I was her instructor during advanced sniper training at Fort Benning. I've also had the opportunity to observe her performance during joint training exercises with Special Operations Forces." The revelation created a stir among the assembled soldiers. Advanced sniper training at Fort Benning was notoriously difficult, with failure rates exceeding 60%. The fact that Maria had not only completed the program, but impressed Command Sergeant Major Blake was significant information. Blake continued, his voice carrying the authority that came from decades of military experience. "General, in 31 years of military service, I've trained hundreds of snipers. I've seen soldiers who could shoot with incredible precision, but couldn't function under pressure. I've seen others who were tough as nails, but couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. Staff Sergeant Santos is one of the few who combines both qualities." "Sergeant Major, I respect your opinion," General Hayes replied, "but I still have fundamental concerns about placing women in combat positions where physical strength and endurance are critical factors." Blake's expression grew serious. "Sir, with all due respect, I think you should know the full story about Staff Sergeant Santos before making that judgment." The Command Sergeant Major turned to Maria, his eyes conveying a message that only she could interpret. They had discussed this moment during her training, the inevitable confrontation with officers who questioned her presence in combat roles. Blake had prepared her for exactly this situation. "Staff Sergeant, I think it's time General Hayes learned about your background," Blake said quietly. "All of it." Maria felt her heart rate increase. The moment she had both anticipated and dreaded was finally arriving. Her carefully guarded secret, the reason she had been authorized to carry the M40 despite her gender, was about to be revealed to a hostile audience. "Sir," Maria began, addressing General Hayes directly, There are aspects of my military background that are not included in my standard personnel file. General Hayes frowned. What kind of aspects? Maria took a deep breath before continuing. Before joining the regular Army, I served 2 years with a classified special operations unit. My records were sealed for security reasons, but Command Sergeant Major Blake was involved in that program. The revelation hit the assembled soldiers like a physical blow. Special Operations Forces were the elite of the elite, warriors selected and trained for missions that regular soldiers never even heard about. The idea that the young woman standing before them had served in such a unit was almost incomprehensible. Blake nodded confirmation. Staff Sergeant Santos was part of a pilot program involving female operators in direct action missions. She participated in 17 classified operations across 3 different theaters of operation. Her performance was exemplary. General Hayes stared at Maria with new understanding, pieces of a puzzle falling into place in his mind. What kind of operations? Counterterrorism, hostage rescue, and high-value target elimination, Maria replied, her voice steady despite the significance of what she was revealing. I was specifically trained for long-range precision shooting in urban environments. The general's entire demeanor changed as he processed this information. Special operations soldiers were held to different standards, evaluated by different criteria, and trusted with responsibilities that went far beyond regular military duties. If Maria Santos had served successfully in that community, it meant she had already proven herself capable of handling the most demanding combat situations. Why wasn't this information in your personnel file? General Hayes asked. Blake answered before Maria could respond. Because her unit officially doesn't exist, sir. The program was classified above most security clearances, and participants were required to maintain cover identities when they transitioned back to regular military service. Colonel Chen looked stunned. He had commanded Maria for 8 months without knowing about her special operations background. The revelation explained many things about her performance and attitude that had puzzled him previously. So when you asked who authorized her to carry that rifle, Blake continued, the answer is classified at levels you probably don't have access to. But I can tell you that the people who made that decision knew exactly what they were doing. General Hayes stood quietly for several minutes, reevaluating everything he thought he knew about the situation. His objections to women in combat had been based on assumptions about physical capabilities and mental toughness that were clearly incorrect in this case. Sergeant Williams looked like he had been struck by lightning. His certainty about female soldiers being unsuited for combat roles was crumbling in the face of evidence he couldn't dispute. Jake Martinez smiled with pride for his friend, finally understanding why she had always seemed different from other soldiers. Staff Sergeant Santos, General Hayes said finally, it appears I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on incomplete information. No apology necessary. Sir, Maria replied, my background is unusual, and your concerns about combat effectiveness are completely reasonable. I would have had similar questions if I were in your position. But General Hayes wasn't finished. His military mind was now focused on the implications of what he had learned, and new questions were forming about why a special operations soldier was serving in a regular Army unit. Sergeant Major Blake, I need to understand something, the general said. If Staff Sergeant Santos is as qualified as you indicate, why is she assigned to a reconnaissance unit instead of continuing with special operations? The question hung in the air, and Maria exchanged glances with Blake. This was the part of her story that was most difficult to explain, the reason she had requested transfer back to regular military service, despite her success in the classified world. That, sir, Blake said quietly, is a story that requires a more private discussion. There are aspects of Staff Sergeant Santos's service that cannot be discussed in an open setting. General Hayes nodded, understanding immediately. Military operations at the highest classification levels often involved personal costs that were not reflected in official records. Heroes sometimes returned from secret missions carrying invisible wounds that required different kinds of healing. "Very well," the general said. "Staff Sergeant Santos, you have certainly demonstrated your qualifications today. I withdraw my objections to your carrying that weapon." But even as he spoke, General Hayes realized that the situation was more complex than a simple question about military authorization. Maria Santos represented something larger, a fundamental change in how the military would operate in the future. Women like her were proving that gender was irrelevant when it came to combat effectiveness, and that realization would require adjustments in thinking that went far beyond individual personnel decisions. As the assembled soldiers began to disperse, returning to their regular duties, Maria Santos secured her rifle and reflected on what had just transpired. She had won this particular battle, proving her worth to a skeptical general and earning the respect of her peers. But she knew that larger challenges lay ahead, battles that would determine not just her own future, but the future of military service for all women. The desert sun climbed higher into the clear sky, and Camp Liberty returned to its normal rhythm of training and preparation. But something fundamental had changed during that morning inspection, a shift in understanding that would ripple through military circles for years to come. General Hayes remained at Camp Liberty for 3 more hours after the shooting demonstration, conducting private meetings that would reshape several military careers. His first conversation was with Colonel Chen in the base commander's office, where classified personnel files were finally opened and secrets that had been hidden for national security reasons were revealed. "Colonel, I need you to understand what you have in Staff Sergeant Santos," General Hayes said, reviewing documents that bore classification markings he rarely saw. "Her service record includes operations that most generals never hear about. She's not just qualified for her current position, she's overqualified." Colonel Chen studied the files with growing amazement. Maria's redacted service history read like something from a military thriller novel. Counter-terrorism operations in urban environments, precision elimination of high-value targets, and extraction missions behind enemy lines. The young woman he had commanded for 8 months was actually a veteran of America's most secret wars. "Sir, why was she transferred out of special operations?" Chen asked. "Soldiers with these qualifications usually stay in classified programs until retirement." General Hayes closed the file and looked out the window toward the training grounds where Maria was now conducting routine instruction with other soldiers. "That, Colonel, is where this story becomes complicated. Staff Sergeant Santos requested the transfer herself, for reasons that speak to her character as much as her combat skills." The general explained that Maria's final special operations mission had involved a hostage rescue in an unnamed Middle Eastern country. Intelligence had located American contractors being held by terrorists in a compound heavily defended by experienced fighters. Maria's team was tasked with eliminating the guards and extracting the hostages with minimal noise and no civilian casualties. "The mission went perfectly," General Hayes continued. "Santos eliminated 7 targets from over 600 yards, allowing her team to penetrate the compound undetected. All hostages were recovered alive, and her team extracted without casualties." Colonel Chen frowned. "That sounds like a successful operation. Why would it cause her to leave special operations?" "Because one of the hostages she saved was a 12-year-old girl who had been taken with her father," General Hayes replied quietly. "The child had been held captive for 3 weeks, and the psychological trauma was severe. Santos spent the entire extraction flight trying to calm the girl. And something about that experience changed her perspective on military service." The story continued as General Hayes revealed that Maria had spent her own leave time visiting the rescued girl in a German military hospital, helping her through the early stages of recovery. She had maintained contact with the family even after they returned to the United States, becoming an unofficial part of their healing process. Santos came to realize that she wanted to do more than eliminate threats. General Hayes explained. She wanted to train the next generation of soldiers, to pass on her skills to people who might someday face similar situations. That's why she requested transfer to a training unit. Colonel Chen began to understand the remarkable soldier he had been commanding. Maria Santos was not just technically proficient. She was driven by a sense of purpose that went beyond personal achievement. She wanted to multiply her impact by creating other skilled soldiers who could protect innocent people. "Sir, does this mean she's planning to stay in a training role permanently?" Chen asked. "That remains to be seen," General Hayes replied. "But I can tell you that the Army would be foolish to lose someone with her capabilities, regardless of what role she chooses to serve in." While this conversation was taking place, Maria herself was conducting an impromptu marksmanship clinic for younger soldiers who had witnessed her demonstration. Word of her special operations background had spread through the base, transforming her from a curiosity into a celebrity. Soldiers who had previously questioned her qualifications now sought her instruction. "The key to consistent accuracy is building proper fundamentals," Maria explained to a group of 6 soldiers gathered around her rifle. "Breathing, sight alignment, trigger control, and follow-through. Master those basics, and advanced techniques become much easier." Private First Class Jennifer Walsh, one of the few other women in the unit, raised her hand tentatively. "Staff Sergeant, how do you deal with people who don't think women should be in combat roles?" Maria paused her technical instruction and looked at the young soldier who reminded her of herself several years earlier. "Private Walsh, the only opinion that matters is your own. If you believe you can do the job, then prove it every single day. Let your performance speak louder than anyone's doubts." Jake Martinez, who had been observing the impromptu lesson, added his own perspective. "I've worked with Staff Sergeant Santos for over a year, and I can tell you that she's the best soldier I've ever served with, regardless of gender. Her focus is on mission accomplishment and taking care of her teammates." The group of students nodded appreciatively, absorbing lessons that went far beyond marksmanship techniques. They were learning about leadership, professionalism, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from proven competence. Meanwhile, Sergeant Williams approached the group from across the training area. His expression was thoughtful rather than hostile, a significant change from his earlier skepticism. The revelation of Maria's special operations background had forced him to reconsider many of his assumptions about female soldiers. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Williams said as he joined the group, "I owe you an apology. I made judgments based on ignorance rather than facts." Maria looked up from the rifle she was demonstrating, surprised by the senior sergeant's presence and tone. "Sergeant Williams, no apology necessary. Your concerns were reasonable given the information you had available." "No, they weren't," Williams replied firmly. "I let my prejudices override my professional judgment. That's not acceptable for a non-commissioned officer." The conversation that followed was observed by the entire training group, providing them with an unexpected lesson in professional growth and intellectual honesty. Williams acknowledged that his resistance to women in combat had been based on outdated assumptions rather than current reality. "Staff Sergeant, I've been in the Army for 15 years, Williams said, "and I've never seen shooting like what you demonstrated this morning. If you're willing to teach me some of your techniques, I'd consider it an honor to learn from you." The gesture was significant, representing a fundamental shift in attitude from one of Maria's most vocal critics. Other soldiers observed the exchange with interest, understanding that they were witnessing something historically important. "I'd be happy to work with you, Sergeant Williams," Maria replied. "Good marksmanship is about continuous improvement, regardless of how experienced you are." As the afternoon training continued, General Hayes concluded his private meetings and prepared for departure. But before leaving Camp Liberty, he requested one final conversation with Maria Santos. They met in Colonel Chen's office, where the general could speak freely about classified matters. "Staff Sergeant, I want you to know that your demonstration today has changed my perspective on several important issues," General Hayes began. "I came here with preconceptions that were clearly incorrect." "Thank you, sir. I understand that change is difficult, especially when it challenges long-held beliefs." General Hayes studied Maria's face, seeing the maturity and wisdom that came from combat experience most soldiers her age would never acquire. "I have a question for you, and I want an honest answer. Are you satisfied with your current assignment, or would you consider returning to Special Operations?" The question was more complex than it appeared on the surface. Maria understood that General Hayes was offering her opportunities that could advance her career significantly, possibly including assignments that would establish her as a pioneer for women in elite military units. "Sir, I appreciate the confidence you're showing in me," Maria replied carefully. "But I believe my current role is exactly where I need to be. Training soldiers, sharing knowledge, and helping build the next generation of warriors is the most important contribution I can make right now." General Hayes nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her choice. "What about the future? Do you plan to remain in training roles throughout your career?" Maria considered the question thoughtfully. "I think the military is changing, sir. We're going to need leaders who understand both traditional military values and the realities of modern warfare. I want to be part of that evolution, whether in training, operations, or leadership positions." "And what about the resistance you'll face from people who still don't believe women belong in combat roles?" "Sir, resistance is part of leadership," Maria replied. "Every significant change in military history has faced opposition from people who were comfortable with the status quo. The key is proving your value through performance rather than arguments." General Hayes smiled for the first time since arriving at Camp Liberty. "Staff Sergeant Santos, I believe you have a bright future in the military. The Army needs more leaders who combine your technical skills with your understanding of people." As their conversation concluded, General Hayes made a decision that would impact Maria's career and the careers of many other women seeking combat roles. He authorized the creation of a new training program that would use Maria's expertise to develop female snipers for deployment with combat units. "I'm recommending you for promotion to Sergeant First Class," General Hayes announced, "and assignment as the senior instructor for this new program. You'll have the opportunity to train the next generation of female snipers and establish standards that will be used throughout the Army." Maria felt a mixture of pride and responsibility as she absorbed the significance of what General Hayes was proposing. The new assignment would make her a pioneer in military history, responsible for proving that women could not only serve effectively in combat roles, but could also train others to do the same. "Sir, I'm honored by your confidence in me," Maria replied. "I accept the assignment and the responsibility that comes with it." As General Hayes prepared to leave Camp Liberty, he reflected on the lessons he had learned during his visit. His inspection had begun with skepticism about women in combat and ended with the authorization of programs that would expand their opportunities throughout the military. The drive back to headquarters gave him time to consider how he would explain these changes to his superiors, many of whom shared his original doubts about female soldiers in combat roles. But the evidence was undeniable. Maria Santos had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded those of most male soldiers, and her background in special operations proved that women could perform effectively in the most demanding military assignments. Back at Camp Liberty, word of Maria's promotion and new assignment spread quickly through the base. Soldiers who had witnessed her demonstration understood that they had been present for a historic moment, the beginning of a new era in military service. Colonel Chen called Maria into his office for a final conversation about her upcoming transition. "Staff Sergeant, I want you to know that having you in this unit has been an honor. You've changed minds and opened opportunities that didn't exist before. Thank you, sir. This assignment has taught me as much as I've taught others. Working with soldiers who were initially skeptical helped me understand the importance of patience and professionalism in changing attitudes. What's your biggest concern about the new training program? Chen asked. Maria thought carefully before responding. Sir, my biggest concern is ensuring that we maintain the same standards for everyone. The program has to succeed based on merit, not lowered expectations. If we compromise on quality, we'll damage the credibility of all female soldiers who come after us. Colonel Chen nodded his agreement. That's exactly the right attitude. The military will be watching this program closely, and its success or failure will influence policy decisions for years to come. As the sun set over Camp Liberty, Maria Santos packed her equipment and prepared for the next chapter of her military career. The M40 rifle that had been the subject of so much controversy would accompany her to the new training facility, where it would be used to teach other women the skills they needed to serve in combat roles. Jake Martinez helped her load her gear into the transport vehicle that would take her to her new assignment. Their partnership had been professionally rewarding and personally meaningful, demonstrating that effective military teams were built on mutual respect rather than shared demographics. I'm going to miss working with you, Jake said as they secured the last of her equipment. This isn't goodbye, Maria replied. You'll always have a place in any unit I'm assigned to. Good spotters are harder to find than good snipers. As her vehicle departed Camp Liberty, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a young girl learning to shoot with her father, through the demanding training of special operations, to this new role as an instructor and pioneer, each step had prepared her for greater responsibilities. The road ahead would be challenging. Training female snipers would require overcoming institutional resistance, proving capabilities under scrutiny, and maintaining standards that satisfied skeptics while encouraging new recruits. But Maria Santos had faced difficult challenges before, and she had always emerged stronger and more capable. 6 months later, the first class of female snipers graduated from Maria's training program. Their performance in advanced marksmanship, tactical movement, and simulated combat scenarios exceeded all expectations. General Hayes attended their graduation ceremony, officially validating the program and authorizing its expansion to other military installations. During his speech to the graduates, General Hayes acknowledged the historic significance of the moment. Today marks a new chapter in military history. These soldiers have proven that combat effectiveness is determined by skill, training, and dedication, not by gender. They represent the future of our armed forces. Maria Santos stood at attention as the new snipers received their qualifications, feeling pride in their accomplishments and satisfaction in her role as their instructor. The question of who had authorized her to carry the M40 rifle had been answered definitively. She had authorized herself through years of training, combat experience, and unwavering commitment to excellence. The military would continue to evolve, face new challenges, and adapt to changing requirements. But the fundamental principle that Maria Santos had demonstrated would remain constant. In the profession of arms, competence and character matter more than any other consideration. Those who possess both qualities earn their place through performance, and their contributions make everyone around them better. As the graduation ceremony concluded and the new snipers prepared for their assignments to combat units around the world, Maria Santos smiled with quiet satisfaction. The young girl who had learned to shoot in her father's backyard had become a leader in America's military transformation, opening doors that would benefit generations of women who chose to serve their country in combat roles. The M40 rifle remained at her side, no longer a symbol of controversy, but a tool of instruction, representing the highest standards of military professionalism and the endless possibilities that awaited those brave enough to pursue them.